your special issue was also, I think, innovative in the way you approached it. You asked authors to submit 6-page abstracts. And I think, to the best of my knowledge, POMs had never done that before, right? And I think you got those abstracts in the first round, and then you invited a more full-scale paper. Could you talk about a little bit more about the behind-the-scenes thinking behind it? And yeah,
I want to say this because we wanted to capture people's attention early, and we recognized that people were themselves distancing at that point in time. Vaccine had not been yet been invented when we started this. And we actually looked at MSOM, and they accept 6-page abstracts sometimes as the basis for early submissions. And we said we could do that. And the idea was that the abstracts will allow us to shortlist ideas, give people early feedback. And it wasn't like a be all and end all, but it would get us people to channel their thinking. So that's what we decided to do. And we didn't know how many papers we would get. 150 is a lot of papers. And so we were also fortunate to get many senior editors. You were certainly one of them, we acknowledge you, who stepped up to help us with this. And so it's one thing to get the abstract mode of feedback, but then there's another thing to get help from experts like you for certain things to assess it, which is a different modality. And in some cases, we were not sure after the 6-page assessment if we did a fair enough job, in which case we asked the people for an extra round, sort of middle round in between, if we're not sure if it was a keeper or not. So it was a little iterative. But that's how we did it. And we did the first round very, very quickly in 2 months because of this. And then we gave guidance in terms of what we would anticipate in a full paper or asked questions. So typically, the papers went 4 rounds, but the first round, a round and a half or 2 rounds was relatively quick. And then things settled down. Now we're doing full papers, normal scrutiny, so on. But we'd come down from 150 to about 40 papers by then. I mean, there were areas where we're expecting more papers, like vaccine production, or we simply didn't get it. We just got fewer papers in those areas, and that's how it happened. We got many, many more papers on some variant of SCIR or diffusion models with additional operations, production technology, QA, or control theory, or machine learning based analysis.
So for the research community, what would you say are some of the key takeaways from the studies in the special issue?
So I want to sort of make 2 levels of observations. So there's 2 kinds of takeaways. And because there's so much diffusion in our community in terms of knowledge, I think this message is spreading, but we certainly have captured it. One is what happens when the pandemic hits, right? What kinds of policies work better or worse as in terms of operations techniques. So you're isolating within hospital, just outside of the hospital, or in regions. How can you inform those decisions? How, as more first wave or a second wave of these infections are coming, can you make better predictions? So Professor Barakas from MIT has done a wonderful paper on multiple waves. How do you do machine learning across multiple waves? And she showed that her predictions were more robust than the ones that the CDC had used, for example. So if such unfortunate events happen again, I think our community and its partners in hospitals or in regional areas would have better tools informed by operations techniques on which we could do more research. And that would be sort of a reactive kind of event. The second area, which is emerging and certainly emerged here, is more proactive in terms of what I would call as resilience thinking. So resilience is not a new term to our field, but we didn't certainly put that as a major objective function in a lot of our research. Sometimes we did, but other times we thought about flexibility or other things. Here, the notion was either what I would call as proactive or reactive resilience. It's an area that certainly got a lot more thinking, a lot more theorizing, a lot more evidence. And I'm not going to say that it was limited to our journal. Our journal, what we're seeing in our journal is perhaps a tip of a very important iceberg or trend. So that a lot of us now we are thinking about it reactively, proactively. We are teaching it in our classrooms. We are theorizing, and it's becoming a natural field of inquiry, if you will, in terms of how we think about our decisions. So those are the two areas in which I felt that novel theory is being offered in our journal, but certainly also in really good sister journals as well.
Yeah. The other question that I had was, since you mentioned that you had about 150 submissions, what would you see that the research community can take from this and build on this? And where can we go from here to expand on this?
So what was interesting for us was that, yeah, we accepted 14 papers, and there were about another half a dozen or so that are probably will still get accepted with more work. Well, in many cases, we actually told authors that we were rejecting it for the special issue because in the time frame that we had, we didn't feel that we had enough bandwidth to process it or get it done or so on. But probably what's really interesting is, again, I'm going to go back to this theme of data, that the ones that emerged up, ground up, where people that were thinking about these data in novel ways. And once they had marshaled data, then they brought in suitably, either because of their training or because of the relevance, a specific model, a model such as human, just give the same example again, or a model that had a supply chain with multi-step control or whatever else. But the interesting part there is this focus, and it wasn't like they were just empirical papers or just mathematical papers or just regressions. It was the combination. And also in terms of action research, so there's a table that says nearly half the papers that we finally accepted had an action component. So I'll give an example. This is localized infections in a region called Ticino, which is the southern tip of Switzerland, northern tip of Italy. That was one of the highest infected places fairly early. And there, the researchers hooked up with the hospital folks and the regional managers to create a team that worked together to think about things that worked, then things didn't work. Similarly, the folks at Purdue and in Indiana, they developed a model for nurse staffing. And not only was it a model, but then they went back and we said the second round, we sort of said, go back if you can and ask people what happened when you implemented the staffing policy and give us sort of an update. So they kind of gave us an update. So that willingness to sort of do this cross-disciplinary work, go back to action research, and in many cases, in my mind, it was possible because the situation was very important, that the way they staffed the nurses actually mattered to saving lives, and it was very interesting. The last example I would give is a slightly different example, and this is a paper from folks at Anthem and others at University of Tennessee in Knoxville. There they worked with a retail company. And what the retail company decided was that there are two choices, either to carry much more inventory or make faster decisions, right? And so it was a trade-off. Now, the issue with the faster decisions was more organizational than anything else, because the team itself was not set up to make faster decisions. But here, when your back is to the wall, you simply have to make faster decisions, which happen to be a little bit different because your forecast horizon is different. So your stocking policy would be different. The way you convince more senior managers would be different, and so on. And as we know, a lot of retail companies were under the threat of going bankrupt. And there were other retail companies that kind of saved themselves by taking the federal funding for keeping the employees in place and so on. So there were all these unusual activities that were observed. And so to say that I'll have a base stock policy and I'll just carry more base stock or less base stock is not the real way in which resilience came about. And we are fortunate that, again, these folks, they took their model, they showed us what they'd done. We asked them to go back to this company and say, what happened to you? And again, the point is that it was a resilient reaction that was correct for that period of time, maybe a little costlier than a normal production case or a retail distribution case. But it was probably the only choice for them then. And so we were able to learn from it, learn some behavioral choices that managers made in planning, and so on. So a lot of credit to these authors for working so hard in getting behind these models.